Thank you very much. It's great to be here. It is a thrill to be back here. Someone asked me before I walked in if when I was going to school here I ever imagined anything like this. And the truth is you guys are of a completely different generation. You live in a totally different world. My eldest child is 13, and I'm on the board of the school where she goes, so I know a lot of the high school kids. And the truth is people your age think a lot more about their future than people my age did when we were your age. That's just the reality of it. The only thing I was really concerned about when I went to school here was that Buffalo Joe's would never go out of business. So I'm delighted to see that it is still there. My roommate, Craig Isaacs, who was Jewish, was an Orthodox Jew, broke the fast one year with a double order of suicide wings. And I had to take him to the hospital. I had a delightful time talking with Dean Ham a little bit about the ways in which my years at Medill and the things that I learned here have helped me and are responsible for any of the things that I'm able to do. For example, we have a policy on my show, on Mike and Mike, which is titled, "Only Greenie May Make Breaking News Announcements." This came up because one day during the program I was in the middle of talking and all of a sudden Golick stopped me and he said, "Wait, Greenie, hold on, Greenie, we have major breaking news." And I said, "What is it?" He said, "Colin Powell just re-signed." And I looked at the computer, and of course there it was, Associated Press Bulletin, Secretary of State Colin Powell resigns. Mike was very upset that it spelled the same. And I said, "What would have given you the impression that he would have re-signed? Did you think he got an offer from another nation?" Mike wanted to know what the signing bonus was. So not long ago, when the Pope resigned, I had a little fun with him. I said, "Mike, we have news. The Pope has re-signed. My people made him an offer." Golick. People ask me all the time how you get to be a sports broadcaster, and I always tell them, play 9 years in the NFL. Because then you can host the #1 sports talk show in America even if you can neither read nor write. My way was a little different. You know, Mike is from one kind of sports family. His dad played football. He and his brothers played football. His sons play football. I'm from a Jewish sports family. We had season tickets. I came to Northwestern in the fall of 1985, and I watched a lot of football and a lot of basketball, a lot of other things. None of it particularly good. We weren't very good then. And as I've said, for 20 years, or now 24 years, I didn't come to Northwestern because of the football. I came to Northwestern because of Medill. And there are only 3 things I put on any of my books. I've written 3 books. And in the bio, the author's bio, I only put 3 things. I put that I work at ESPN, I put the names of my wife and my kids, and I put that I'm a graduate of the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University. It's one of the proudest things in my life. And let me first say, for all of you who got in, congratulations. How the hell did you do it? Because it was competitive when I was your age, but now it's ridiculous. I know what it's like trying to get into these kinds of schools from high school, so you guys are all infinitely smarter than I am and are going to achieve far more than I could ever even imagine. I'm positive of that. I will say this, though. From this experience, from being here today, game day is going to be here tomorrow, the football game and ABC is going to be here tomorrow night, and I have no idea if we're going to win or we're going to lose. I certainly hope that we win. But if there's one thing I've learned from this, it is the value of sports at a university, because I have heard from more people that I went to school with in the last few weeks than I probably have in the last 20 years. And that's what something like this does. And that's why this growth of this football program, and all the credit in the world to Pat Fitzgerald, who is the coach, and to Jim Phillips, who's the AD, Morty Shapiro, who's the president, who really supports this and has decided it's going to become a priority here. It brings people together. Walking around the campus, everybody is wearing purple. Everything is purple. There is a spirit about this, and I really genuinely believe that comes from what the football team is doing. So there is a value in that. It's kind of hard to quantify. It's not as important as the education that you get, but it's valuable. So I'm gratified by that, and I've learned that by being here this week, and so that's been a lot of fun for me. I'm very pleased to see that, and I'm pleased for all of you that you're getting a chance to have this. We didn't have it. Michael Wilbon came out to my show this morning, and he told me during the 4 years he was at Northwestern, their record in football was 3-40-1. The one was a scoreless tie against Illinois, and when he said that, one guy from the crowd said, "I was there, we booed both teams." So there is value in this. There is value in what's going on here. So enjoy it, embrace it. It's wonderful. It's something we never had. And I'm having a great time with it. I'm sort of living vicariously through all of you. My single favorite statistic about our university that I quoted this morning on the air. This is what makes Northwestern such a special place. We're number 16 in the AP poll, and we're number 12 in the U.S. News and World Report. That's what I'm talking about. There's very, very few schools that can say things like that. So, you know, you keep things in perspective, and you enjoy it for while it's here. The other piece of advice that I would give you, and I want to spend most of our time with questions, because I think it's important that I talk about the things you're interested in more than the things I'm interested in. But the other piece of advice that I would give you is to enjoy your time here. I had a lovely young lady asking me some questions before I came in. I'm sure she's in the room somewhere, and she was asking me a lot about whether I imagined this when I started. That's how I opened my comments just now. About whether I was thinking this way when I was younger, about whether I planned this, how I planned, what was I thinking when I was here, what was I thinking I would do when I got out of school, what was I thinking I would do in 5 years. And the truth is, I really wasn't. And I'm not in any way suggesting you shouldn't be thinking about your futures. It's obviously important. I'm not in any way suggesting that you shouldn't be planning the rest of your lives, because obviously you have to. But also, I look back on my years in college so fondly, because in its own way, they are the last time that you can live this way. You're going to get out of here and things are going to change. Hopefully some of them are going to change in enormously positive ways, but there are things you're never going to get back when you leave here. So enjoy them while you're here. Have fun while you're here. Take the L into the city and have fun down there. Go out and go see what Chicago has to offer, whatever it is you may be interested. If you're interested in the Art Institute, go there. If you're interested in Wrigley Field, go there. If you're interested in going to see world-class theater, go there. Enjoy yourselves while you're here. Have fun while you're here. College is supposed to be fun. It's not only fun. You have to work, you have to think, you have to plan, you have to do all of that. But make sure you have fun, because the fun that you have when you leave here will be different kind of fun. You'll never have this kind of fun again, or at least you won't have the opportunity to have this kind of fun again. So please do it. Take it from someone who has been there and has done it. Have fun while you're here. Don't just worry about your future. Your future is going to be there no matter what happens. Make sure you have fun while you're here. You don't want to look back on your years at Northwestern and say, you know, man, I wish I had had a better time when I was there. I spent too much time worrying about my future. The future isn't going to be as complicated as old farts like me try and make it sound. Make sure you spend some time having fun while you're here. So I want to open it up to some questions, because I think that's more important. I could talk forever if you want me to, but more significantly, I want to answer whatever it is you have to ask. So why don't we start? Yeah, you got it?
Hi, I'm Molly Kathleen.
Okay, I was about to say, is Molly Kathleen here? Molly's father was a fraternity brother of mine named Steve. And he sent me a note this week that said Molly was going to be here. I'm very proud of you. Congratulations.
Thank
Your
you.
dad was my idol when I was in college. It's a true story. Steve is 2 years older than me, and he was a junior, and he was the rush chairman of I was a Theta Chi fraternity, and he was the rush chairman of my fraternity when I pledged. And he had this beautiful girlfriend named Tracy Tappan, who was this really cool, classy girl. And they've now been married how long?
25 years.
25 years. And their daughter Molly goes to Northwestern. And he was someone I really looked up to. That's the stuff that matters. Like he was a guy I looked up to. He was older than me. He was cool. He was good looking. He was smart. He had this great girlfriend. It was just awesome, you know. I didn't have any of that stuff, you know. And let me tell you, your dad was cool. I know this is probably the last thing in the world you were expecting anyone to ever tell you. But your dad was really cool. I don't know what he's like now. I haven't seen him in years. But he was really cool. So I tell him, hopefully I'm going to see him. I know it's your mom's 25th anniversary.
Yeah, they fly in today.
Okay, yeah. So hopefully I'm going to see them this weekend. But I knew you were going to be here, and I'm very happy to meet you.
Well, thank you. Well, they say hi. And I was also wondering, what would you say the most valuable thing you learned in Medill is?
The most valuable thing I learned in Medill was that the most important thing is not asking a question, but it's listening to the answer. If I were to give you some advice about being a journalist, it would be that. I have been in the journalism business, or at least in the sports broadcasting business, for 24 years. And I've seen a lot of people. Here's the enormous advantage you are going to have the minute you walk out the doors of this university. You have a degree in journalism, not in communications. There are a lot of people out there who know how to sit in front of a camera, know how to comb their hair, know how to write down a question and then ask it, know how to write down the second question, ask that, regardless of what the answer to the first one was, know how to change cameras, look down, move over here, make sure you're sitting on the back of your jacket. They all know how to do that, but they don't know how to ask a question and listen to the answer. The second question you ask should always be influenced by the answer to the first one, and that's something you learn in journalism. Listening is very important. There's a concept of inputting and output, or inputting and output, input and output. Most people who, almost anyone can output. I can sit there and talk all you want. Give me a script. I'll just start talking. Or in my case, I don't even need a script. Just wind me up. I'll start talking. But the really good ones listen. I've been on the David Letterman show 10 times. Here's what makes David Letterman so good. He listens when you're talking. He asks you a question that relates to something you just said. He'll interrupt you in the middle of what you're saying to try and make a point. He's actually paying attention. If you sit there, you have to prepare for an interview. There's no question about that. You have to be prepared with a list of things you want to ask and a list of information you want to get. But the best interviews are the ones that go completely in an opposite direction from what you were expecting, because something that the person you're interviewing said takes you in that direction. And it's true of my show as well, in a talk show. We'll plan out our segments. Before our segment begins, we'll say, okay, we're going to open up with, all right, we're here at Northwestern, how great it is to be back. They got my head on a stick behind me. This is great. Then we'll get into the 2 baseball games from yesterday, and then we'll get into the Browns win, but Brian Hoyer got hurt. This is our plan. The best segments in the world that we've ever done, the most memorable ones, are the ones where the plan went out the window immediately, because Mike said something that got me thinking about something else, and now we go that way. In my opinion, a show, a broadcast, has to be moving in one direction at all time. It cannot be stopped. It cannot be stagnant. All right, there's like a line. I don't have anything to write on, but it's got to be sort of moving in this direction. If it stops, it sucks. If it's moving in like sort of horizontally, it's bad. But it doesn't have to continue going this way. It can start going this way or this way. Let it take you in a different direction. Let the conversation go where it wants to go. So I would say that's the most important piece of advice I would give you as far as interviewing is concerned. And let's face it, what is journalism? Journalism, 9/10 of it is conducting an interview. The other 10th is figuring out who to interview, right? You say, here's a story. I want to get a story. All right, who do I need to talk to? That's 10%. Now talking to that person, that's the other 90. That's overwhelmingly the most important part of the job. So that would be my primary piece of advice, is when someone is answering your question, listen to it. When I first started working in TV, parenthetically, your studio upstairs is much nicer than the television studio I had in my first 3 jobs. Gorgeous. But I remember I used to work with a guy, I'm not going to say his name because he might still be on TV here for all I know, but I worked at CLTV. Do you guys know what that is? Chicagoland Television. I don't want to suggest that we were a little behind in the news, but our motto was CLTV. If it's news to Chicago, it's news to us. That wasn't really our motto, but it might as well have been. But anyway, it was a great place to start. And I did sports there. And I used to work with an anchor who would sit at his desk and practice saying, thanks very much. So he'd be sitting, I'm sitting here, I'm doing sports, I'm writing my sportscast, he's over here doing news, and he's sitting there by himself going, I thought to myself, this is not journalism. That's my point. Saying thanks very much is really not journalism. Anchorman is a great movie because it makes fun of all the right things in journalism. I'm Ron Burgundy. Who the hell put a question mark in the prompter? That's the point. That's the point. You should know that's not a question. Who's next? This young man told me that he got up at 6 o'clock in the morning before working out every single morning and watching me on TV when he was growing up, which made me feel very old. I had one guy who's a student here today tell me that he was listening to me every single day when his father drove him to kindergarten. They would listen to me in the car. I immediately felt liver spots breaking out on my hands. You know you're old when I was standing on the sideline and the cheerleaders were behind me and I was looking at which one of them I thought would make a good babysitters.
All right, so in your first book, Why My Wife Thinks I'm an Idiot, you mentioned how tough it was to leave your daughter when she was first born. And how do you deal with that, you know, with all this travel you do with your job, the weird hours you work and stuff like that? How hard is it to have a family, and what do you do to try to compensate for that?
My entire first book, which was called Why My Wife Thinks I'm an Idiot, was a tribute to fathers of my generation. So I'll tell you a story about this. So when my daughter Nikki was born, my elder child, she's now 13. But when she was born, my dad and I remained very close. He called me today, said, "Michael, the show looked terrific this morning." 81 years old, my dad. But my dad was up at my house, and Nikki was a baby. And at one point I said to him, "Dad, I'm going to go upstairs and change the baby's diaper." And he grabbed me by the arm, and he said, "You're going to do what?" He couldn't believe it. But every dad I know is changing diapers. The role of gender has changed enormously and continues to. My mom is the first woman in the history of our family to go to college. My wife has a master's degree from here. My daughter could be the president of the United States someday. That's the way this stuff works. And as that has evolved, so does the role of dad. We're no longer the guy standing in the delivery room waiting to hand out cigars. And so it is, one of the things that I have found is there are two kinds of fathers. There are those who tell you their family is the most important thing to them, and then those who actually act that way. And my role model in that regard, in all honesty, was Golic. When we started doing the show, Mike's kids were around the age that my kids are now. And my daughter was born the first year we were on together. And as I've said many times, Mike Golic's kids have cost me a fortune, because we turned down a million great opportunities that would have paid a lot of money because Sydney had a swim meet, or Jake had a basketball game, or Mike was in a school play. And you know what? It's the best thing I can think of to tell you about him, and I hope that I've lived my life that way. So you can say your family is the most important thing to you, or you can actually live your life that way and make it a priority. And whatever that means sacrificing, you do. Because at the end of the day, and it's the most ridiculous cliche in the world, but you know, you've never heard anyone on the deathbed say, "Boy, I really wish I had spent more time working." You wish you had spent more time with your family. I have two kids, my daughter Nikki and my son Steven. You know, that's my priority. That's more important than anything else. And you have to live your life that way. I mean, every person has to figure out their own way to do it, but you do. I'll tell you my favorite story about that. I work very early in the morning. I get up at 3:40 and I get to the studio at 5. But we get off, the trade-off of that is that I get off the air at 10 o'clock and I'm usually home around noon. So I was at school every single day. I went and picked the kids up from school every single day, and I was around school all the time, up until the point where my kids stopped liking that. They used to love that, and now my daughter's like, "Dad, here's a list of things you are allowed to say in front of my friends." I made the enormous mistake of calling one of the kids dude. I think there were women in this room who know what I'm talking about. If your dad called... Molly Callahan, seriously. As cool as your dad is, if he called one of your friends dude, are you ready to kill yourself? You wouldn't be thrilled. No, Nikki was not thrilled. She was like, "Dad, we're going to have a conversation." But anyway, when she was in first grade, they did a day in first grade where some of the parents came in and talked about what they do and how whatever their job is serves the community. So I had to work pretty hard in my own mind to figure out a way I could say my job serves the community, but I finally did. I figured out, I brought in a little DVD of stuff of me milking a cow on the air and Golic getting his eyebrows waxed and all kinds of fun stuff that I knew the kids would like. And then I took questions, and as I took questions, I was talking to all of the kids who I've known all of them, basically all of their lives. And when that was over, Mrs. Hoover, the teacher who's been at the school forever, came over to me. She said, "Mr. Greenberg, I want you to know, I've been a teacher at this school for 30 years. You're the first dad I've ever had who knew every kid's name." That was the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. So I don't know if that answers your question directly or not, but if you can figure out a way that you know the names of all of your kids' friends, you're doing okay. Well, where are you going? There isn't anything going on out there better than this. Yes.
Hi. Whoa. So you were talking earlier about how good the football and the lacrosse, et cetera, successes for the university, and you were just talking about looking at your job and trying to figure out how you like what you do helps the community. Why do you think it's, coming from a person who is very interested in like sports broadcast, why do you think it's important for us in this day and age to talk so much about sports? And like, ESPN, there are like 4 different ESPN channels and like all this attention, and I love sports, right? But why do you think it's so important for us to be talking about sports now?
That's an excellent question. I will give you the answer. There was a day in 2005 where I took my son Stevie, who at that time was 3, to his first football game. And we sat there. I'm a lifelong fan of the Jets. I grew up in New York, and it's a bit of a curse, but it is what it is. And we sat there, and my son Stevie sat here, and my dad sat there, and I sat here. And if you don't, my answer to anyone who doesn't understand why that's so important is you'll never understand, and you don't have to. But for those of us who do understand, that's the best day I've ever had. That's a day that, at least for me, I don't get at a movie, I don't get at a Broadway show, I don't get anywhere else. There's something about being together at a sporting event with, and my mother too, to be honest. My mother is an enormous sports fan. My mother and father cannot watch the Jets in the same room because they start screaming at each other. My mother is where I get my pessimism from. My mother, the Jets will receive the opening kickoff. They'll run it out. They'll get tackled short of the 20 on the 17. And my mother will say, "Why do I even watch this? They always lose. This game is obviously over." But anyway, that day is a day I'll never forget. In my first book, in Why My Wife Thinks I'm an Idiot, I wrote, sports is war without the dying. A war would be phenomenal if at the end of every single day and the end of every single battle, everybody got up, went, took a shower, and had a beer together. It's when everyone starts dying that you lose me. But in sports, you never lose me. I wrote in my book, and some people made up some T-shirts, this is years ago, the reason I love sports is because there's nothing in the world better than investing everything into something that means absolutely nothing. And that's probably the best way I can think of to answer that. Yes. Rohan.
Yeah. So, sorry if
You offered to buy me wings, by the way, at Buffalo
Yeah.
Joe's. Hasn't happened yet.
I'm
Can I
waiting
just
on
quickly say, Rohan, hold that thought. Rohan, I'll get back to you in just a moment. I want to go over here to Molly Calhane. No. When I went to school here, an order of suicide wings, cheddar chips, and a gut RC was $5.34. How the hell do you people afford this now? I went in there the other day. I had to charge my lunch. I didn't have enough money with me to afford lunch at Buffalo Joe's. We need to do an investigation of this. This is the kind of journalism that I would like to see done at the Medill School of Journalism. The skyrocketing rate of wings at Buffalo Joe's. Rohan, back to you.
First of all, the wings offer obviously still stands.
That's easy to say. I don't see any wings. I'm sitting here without a moist towelette.
I don't mean to, ask perhaps a less deep question here, but I
don't know how much less deep it could get than it's been.
So we're having a debate about this before the show started. So you said you wake up every morning at 3:40, but also you have a job that, is kind of dependent on you watching sports, which can oftentimes go late into the night on the East Coast. So do you nap every day? How does the sleep schedule work?
No, that's actually a good question. I get asked that a lot about scheduling. It is a challenge. It's a combination of things. There are some things that you have to see in their entirety. The toughest times of the year for me are like the World Series, the NBA Finals, things that you really have to see every minute of to really get the flavor of it, right? To really understand the nuance of you can't just watch extended highlight packages, but you need to have heard what the announcer said. You have to have gotten a feel for what the vibe of the crowd was. Those are the toughest times of the year for me. Those are nights that I'm up much later than I normally would be. And then sometimes, yes, I will take a nap. I generally try not to. A lot of people who work mornings in my business do. They're nappers. Napping, more often than not, I don't know if this is a physiological thing, it makes me feel worse. I generally feel worse after I nap than I do better. Sometimes I'm just so tired I don't have any option. But as a general rule, I try not to because it doesn't make me feel better. It makes me feel worse. But most of the time, I don't have to watch everything that happened late into the night. I have an hour drive into work every morning. I live about an hour from the studio. So I sit in the back. I don't drive myself. So I sit in the back with an iPad, and I can watch pretty much everything. I will have seen by the time I get to the studio everything that's on Twitter. I will have read every statistic and note. I will have seen all of the extended highlight packages. I will have watched the analysis from after the game, from whether it's, if it's football, it's the guys on our set, Steve Young and Trent Dilfer, or, whatever the occasion may be, to where I go in feeling very comfortable that I know as much as I need to know to do the show. So I would say probably, I don't know how to put a percentage on it, 80% of the time that's the case. And then the other 20% of the time, you just got to suck it up. And you just got to stay up, and you're going to be tired. And that's all there is to it. And one of the things about morning drive, people always ask, do you ever get used to it? The hours, and the answer is no, you really don't. People ask me what's the hardest part of my day. I always say the first 5 minutes. The first 5 minutes stink. No matter how you slice it, the first 5 minutes you just feel awful. But then you get up, you get in the shower, you get yourself moving a little bit, you get a little something to eat, and next thing you know, you're just up now, so now you're just doing it. And what you do get used to is functioning when you don't feel your best. Like that's what you get used to. You don't get used to the hours, but you do get used to functioning. You train yourself to recognize, okay, I'm tired, I can still do what I need to do. And that's probably what you do get used to.
So the not serious question is Lou's or Giordano's, and the serious question is, can you talk a little bit about the journey you took with your JR, and if you did a journalism residency? And
oh, right, yeah, we called that TN when I was here. I was just with Dean
and
Ham.
your first jobs and things like that.
Sure. My favorite pizza in Chicago was Carmen's Pizza. Does anybody know Carmen's? Carmen's Pizza was in Evanston. I was a waiter at Carmen's Pizza in 1988, 1989, which I thought would be a good way to meet girls. Didn't work out that way. And there is a Carmen's Pizza in the city on Halsted and Willow. So when I'm in town, I order from there stuffed spinach, pepperoni, and extra sauce. So that's my favorite pizza in Chicago. People also ask all the time, because I'm from New York and my wife is from Chicago, do you like New York or Chicago pizza better? And I always say they aren't the same thing. It's not an appropriate comparison. They aren't the same food. That's like asking, do you think New York hamburgers are better than Chicago, sandwiches? They're not the same thing. So I like them both for different reasons. I've now forgotten the other question. Oh, my JR. The journalism retreat, it's called, or residency. We didn't have that. We didn't call it that when I was here. It was called TN. It was called TN, Teaching Newspaper. When I went to school here, there was almost no broadcasting. In fact, I was just telling Dean Ham, and I'll be very honest with you. For many of the first years I was out of school here, I felt very distanced from the university. I felt very disenfranchised. I did not feel like the school was proud of me. There was an element where if you were in broadcast journalism, you were sort of looked down upon to some degree. It was not considered prestigious to be a broadcaster. It was much more prestigious to be in print journalism. That's just the God's honest truth. That's the way it was. This was 1989. Things have changed. And that's changed completely now. And obviously now with the unfortunate reality of the newspaper business and the explosion of the broadcasting business, that has shifted. And I think delightfully when I look at all that they've done here to react to that. The studios look phenomenal and all the great work you guys get to do. So I did something called Teaching Newspaper, where I went for a trimester, spring quarter of my junior year, and I wrote for the Jackson Citizen Patriot in Jackson, Michigan. Anyone here from Jackson, Michigan, or from the area? The year that I lived, are you from Jackson, Michigan? Okay, the year I was there, Jackson, Michigan was voted the worst city in America to live in. The only thing that was the claim to fame of Jackson, Michigan was there was a huge prison. And when you would drive in, there were signs everywhere you went saying, "Do not pick up hitchhikers." But I covered news there. So in those days, that's what we did. We worked, whatever it was, 10 weeks or whatever a trimester was. And you worked on the desk for a little while. You went out on stories for a while. I got to write stories. I had stories in the paper and stuff like that. So that's what I did. That was it was called TN then. My old friend Katie Sullivan, who was my year, where did you do TN? Oh, well, we just allowed her in the room anyway because she's a friend of mine. That's right. We got great stories, by the way. If you want a little later, I'll tell you Katie Sullivan stories from 1988. But that's neither here nor there. My first job was as a production assistant at WMAQ Radio in Chicago, which no longer exists. That frequency is now 670. It's now the Score. And I was at WMAQ Radio as a PA, and I did all the regular PA work, which was I answered phones, I got the anchors coffee. This is how different the world was before the internet. I would call the National Weather Service every hour to update the temperatures, and then rush the temperatures in so the news anchors could read the temperature. You're all looking at me like I'm insane. We didn't have an internet then, so you couldn't just go on weather.com. And this just didn't exist then. It was a different world. When I first started hosting talk shows, this was before there was email, we would solicit faxes from the audience. I'd say, call us up right now, or fax me your opinion. And we'd have an intern run in the other room and rip off faxes, and I'd be reading faxes. It was an awful long time ago. But anyway, I worked at WMAQ, and I was always begging to get into the sports department. Anything they'd let me do, can I do some sports? And the sports director was a guy named Ron Gleason. And one day, it was the day before Thanksgiving, 1990, and the Cubs made a big trade. They traded, or a free agent signing, excuse me. They signed Danny Jackson, who was a pitcher at that time and considered to be a good one. As most pitchers do, he went to the Cubs and he stunk. But at the time they signed him, everyone thought it was a very big deal. And there was no one in the sports department that day because it was the day before Thanksgiving, so they let me make the phone calls. So they gave me the phone number of Jim Fry, who was the general manager of the Cubs at the time. They gave me the phone number of Don Zimmer, who was the manager of the Cubs at the time. And they gave me the phone number for Danny Jackson in Cincinnati. And I was going to get this on the air. I was going to get this interview on the air. This was going to be my big break. And I'm calling, and it's busy, and it's busy, and it's busy. And someone comes over and says, WBBM, which was our competition at the time, just had Don Zimmer on the air. And I'm thinking, I'm getting beat. And then they had Jim Fry on the air. I'm getting beat. I'm calling Danny Jackson. The number is busy. So finally I said, I got to do something here. So I called the operator, and I made an emergency breakthrough to his phone. I said, hi, this is Mike Greenberg in Chicago. I need to talk to Danny Jackson. This is an emergency. And for reasons known only to him, he accepted the call. We got the first interview on the air with Danny Jackson. Ron Gleason was the sports director. He remembered that day. A year later, they started the Score, WSCR. In 1992, we started the Score. He needed to fill out the staff. He remembered that day, and he hired me. They hired Ron to be the sports director. He hired me. First, I was the producer of a show that was hosted by two guys named Mike North and Dan Jiggets. I don't know if any of you know those guys. And I was covering games at night in my spare time. They liked what I was doing. And 6 months after that happened, I was on the road covering Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. I was 24. And I was traveling with Jordan, and it was unbelievable. Great stories. Great experiences. But so that was how I started. And I parlayed that into a job at CLTV. And then when ESPN started ESPN News in 1996, I got an audition, and I got the job, and that's how I started at ESPN. So I've been there for 17 years. Quick story about Jordan. So in 1993, Jordan won his third consecutive NBA championship. His father was murdered senselessly while napping in the car on the side of a highway. Jordan flipped out and wound up retiring. People out there, there's this ridiculous rumor that he was surreptitiously suspended by the NBA for gambling. There's no truth to that whatsoever. When his father died, and he had been in the Olympics, so he had not had a break for about 36 consecutive months, and he just couldn't take it, and he retired. So he went to play baseball. He played baseball for the Birmingham Barons, right? Well, the White Sox, the Birmingham Barons, who were managed by Terry Francona, very good. And there were about 5 or 6 of us reporters from Chicago who went to cover him, of which I was one. So I'm down there with Jordan, and the best thing about Jordan during those days was he would play pickup basketball with the guys during their spare time. So one day I'm just sitting around and I'm watching, and they only had 9 guys. So he looks over at me and he says, hey, Greenie, come out and play. I said, all right, because you can probably tell just by looking at me, I've got some game. And so I went out there, and I'm playing, we're playing a little basketball. It's all good. And next thing you know, there's like a switch, there's a pick, there's a roll, and suddenly I'm guarding Michael Jordan straight up at the top of the key, and he still has his dribble. He's holding the ball. So I'm looking at him. He's looking at me. I did the only thing I could think of to do, which is I looked at him and I said, you don't have this shot. He elevated. He took the shot. It clanged off the back of the rim and missed. I thought this was hilarious. I thought the entire thing was hilarious. I started laughing. He did not like that I laughed. Running back down court, he yelled, "Switch it up. I got Greeny." For the next 45 minutes, Michael Jordan covered me. He knocked me down. He dunked on me. And one time, he called a foul on me. I couldn't foul Michael Jordan in a meaningful way with a machete. But what it goes to show you is the intense competitiveness of Michael Jordan. The notion that a 5'11" Jew laughed in his face made him enraged. So that was Jordan. Who's next?
Okay.
Yes.
Hi. Is this on?
Yes.
Okay. You talked a little bit already about how women are becoming more prominent in this field, but I feel like they're still underrepresented in sports journalism. Can you talk a little bit about some of the struggles that women might face trying to get into that field?
I think you're coming along at exactly the right time. When I got into the business in the early 1990s, I saw things that I genuinely regret not ever having said anything about. Well, when I started in the business, there were very few women covering sports. In Chicago, for example, there were really two when I started. There was a woman named Cheryl Ray. I don't know if any of you know that name. She still works locally doing radio. And there was a woman named Andrea Kramer, who is now on HBO, and she was on NBC for years, at ESPN for years. She was at ESPN. She was the ESPN Chicago bureau reporter when I was working and covering sports in Chicago. And when I tell you, I saw, and Andrea is tough. I mean, she is as tough. She's one of the smallest people ever. Andrea is like this big, but she is tough. And even so, I saw things, I saw her being treated ways that I really couldn't believe. And in retrospect, I really wish I had done something about it. I was a 24-year-old kid, and I admit, I was overwhelmed and intimidated as much as anybody else was. And so I never said or did anything about it. But I saw guys purposely, you know, and if you go into an NFL or any sports locker room after a game, you know, the guys they're showering. It's literally a locker room. And so, you know, guys are generally speaking would do interviews in towels. I saw guys purposely dropping their towels and going over next to her and stuff. I saw it all the time. And I didn't do anything about it. And I really do regret that, to be completely honest with you. They put up with a lot. There was a wonderful film that ESPN did. Did any of you see it? What was it called? What? Say it again? Let Them Wear Towels. About the case, this predates that. That was back in the 70s when women had to actually go to court to get the right to cover sports inside the locker room itself. That's the history. That's the bad news. The good news is I don't see any of that anymore. Now, granted, I'm not a reporter anymore, so I'm not in locker rooms that much. But there is an overwhelming, I don't know what the numbers are. I couldn't give you percentages. But there are tons and tons of women from all walks of life that come in all different shapes, colors, and sizes who are covering sports thoroughly and professionally and well, and I think are treated, if not 100% as equals in those locker rooms, then darn close. I genuinely believe that. So that's the good news. So I encourage you to follow sports if that's your passion. It's a wonderful area of journalism in that you very seldom cover horrible tragedy. Like I wrote about this in my book, but when I was in Jackson, Michigan, we had to cover a horrific tragedy, or to put it more in terms of things that you've seen. Anytime there's a plane crash, right, and people are killed in a plane crash, what happens? You see the TV news crews going out to the airport, and they're interviewing people, interviewing the family, putting mics in people's faces. That's part of the job, and it is. I'm not criticizing people who do it, but I couldn't do it. I can't do that. I'm a father. I can't stand there and put my microphone in someone's face whose son just got killed in a plane crash. I can't do it. In sports, we very seldom have that stuff. You know, we get to celebrate things. We get to talk about, as I said, we get to put to place an unrealistic amount of importance on things that are generally completely unimportant. So I recommend it. It's a wonderful way to make a living, and there's endless opportunity for women in the business. I really believe that. Whether you're interested in anchoring, well, and maybe you're interested in writing. Are you interested in broadcast in particular? Right, okay, so in writing, there's endless opportunity. A lot of that has gone now, as you know, to online. You know, ESPN.com, enormous. Yahoo Sports, enormous. CBSSportsline.com, enormous. Almost all the major cities have major newspapers that have sports coverage, and almost all of that is going online. So there's, endless opportunity out there to do that if that's something you're interested in. And I think there is. I can't sit here and tell you that the opportunity is completely equal for women. I just don't know that. I don't have any data that would back that up. But my life experience suggests that if it's not completely equal, it's damn close, and it's on its way to being equal.
What would you say to someone trying to get into sports broadcasting is the best advice if you're not an ex-professional athlete? You know, what's the best thing you can do as just a regular kid trying to get into the business?
You have to do it. I was just saying this to Dean Ham in his office. If you want to be a lawyer, there are a whole lot of things you have to learn in a classroom. If you want to be a doctor, there are a whole lot of things you have to learn in a classroom. If you want to be a broadcaster, there are only so many things you can learn in a classroom. I mean, there are valuable things you can learn in a classroom. But at the end of the day, the only way to become a broadcaster is to broadcast. What I used to do is I would sit in the morning with the newspaper while I was having breakfast, and I would read the newspaper, the sports section, as though I was reading a broadcast. So I was living here in Chicago. I'd read the Chicago Tribune. I'd have, my little bowl of Cheerios, and I would take it out, and I would read Mike Royko's column in those days. He was the legendary columnist in Chicago, or one of the sports columnists here in Chicago, and the great writers, Bernie Lincecum in those days, and Bob Verdi, or whoever it was. And I would read their columns aloud as though I was on the air. That's a good way to do it. Be on the air all the time. Now here you guys have endless opportunity. And with podcasting and stuff like that, you guys can actually be doing broadcast work, even if no one's paying you to do it, all the time. Do that. Do that. Because at the end of the day, the only way to learn how to do this is to do it. And, I assume I'm not telling you anything new, but if there's an opportunity for an internship, take it. If there's an opportunity to go watch someone do their job, take it. Bother people like me about, can I come watch the show? Can I come see the show? Can I come do something there? Don't do that today because I'm busy. But, but generally speaking. So find ways to do stuff. You have a bunch of friends, and you guys want to put together, let's say you're interested in sports. Get together like a bunch of your friends and just do a podcast. Do a weekly podcast. What the hell? Just do a podcast and tweet it. If 4 people listen to it, doesn't really matter. But it'll get better. Just get 2 of you together and do it. Just sit and talk get yourself a microphone and talk for 10 minutes about, about the Northwestern Ohio State game. And then tweet it. Doesn't matter if no one listens to it. But if you do it 10 times, the 10th time will be better than the first. So that's probably the first and best advice I can think of to give you.
You mentioned that reporting is like 90% interviewing, and athletes are guys who are interviewed all the time. So they have their little Rolodex of cliches and their stock answers. Do you have any tips for getting past that, trying to break down that wall?
Not really. I mean, that's just the reality of it. That stuff isn't really journalism. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of people don't like it when I say this, but it's true. We are all sort of playing our own little roles in this game. The players have their interests. The coach has his interest in what he's going to say to us. We have our interest in what we need to get out of them. Everyone's kind of playing their role. Journalism is done privately. Journalism is done when you get a one-on-one interview with somebody that no one else has got, and you're talking to them either on the phone or in person, and you're getting legitimate stuff. That's journalism. The rest of it is media. Media is a business. Journalism is a concept. You can go out and you can do really good journalism, and there's a ton of it being done. HBO is doing a ton of it. Real Sports is phenomenal. That's journalism. ESPN Outside the Lines is journalism. It's phenomenal. When you're standing outside Scottie Pippen, well, I keep using dated examples. If you're standing outside LeBron James' locker and you're one of 30 people standing there going, LeBron, how about that shot you made in the 4th quarter? This is not Edward R. Murrow, right? I mean, this is not Joseph Medill didn't think to himself, someday at this wonderful school that is going to be named after me, some kid will yell that question. That's not journalism, So that is just that is all, in my opinion, kind of a game. If you're going to be a reporter, if you're a talk show host like me, that's part of the game. So what we try and do on our show, give you an example. I'm going to sit a minute if you don't mind. It's been a long day. We had Bill Belichick. Doesn't say anything, right? You've all heard Belichick, the way he talks. So we had Belichick. The first time we ever had Belichick on my show, Dennis Leary was hosting with me. Do you all know Dennis? So Dennis Leary is hosting with me, and he's tight with Belichick. He's a Boston guy. So he gets Belichick on. We get Belichick on. I introduce him, and Dennis says, all right, Bill, here's what I think is going to happen this year. I think Tom is going to have his best season ever because Giselle is pregnant. And sometime around November, she's going to have to cut him off completely. And from that point forward, he's going to have so much pent-up energy that he's going to throw like 60 touchdowns and throw for 400 yards in every game. And there was a lengthy silence. And then Belichick said, I think I'm going to leave that one alone, fellas. That was a good moment because we got something out of that. You know, he didn't give it to us, but it was gotten. When we have Belichick on now, I don't ask him about his team. I ask him about other things entirely because he'll answer. If I ask him, how's Rob Gronkowski's back coming along and when do you think we can expect him to see out on the field again, I might as well open up the window and shout that question out it for all the good it's going to do. He's not going to answer it. So a lot of people believe, well, you have to ask the question even if you know you're not going to get the answer. Baloney. There's no purpose in it because I've got a very limited amount of time. I got 4 hours. During that 4 hours, I got 39 minutes of content. I'm not wasting one of those minutes on asking a question I know I'm not getting an answer to. So when we have him on, we ask him about other things. And he often gives us fairly entertaining answers. And if anyone ever criticizes me for it, and it happens, I always say, you know what? Go ahead. Then you ask him. You ask him the question he's not going to answer. Have fun. That'd be a terrific waste of your time. I'm not going to waste mine.
When you started Mike and Mike, ESPN Radio was only airing in a few markets, and there wasn't really a nationally syndicated sports talk show that had been successful. Did you feel you were taking a big risk in doing the show?
Yes. When we started Mike and Mike, I'll tell you a quick story of how that started. So the morning show on ESPN Radio began in October of 1998. Mike Golick did it with another guy named Tony Bruno. And Tony Bruno left in a huff. They all came into work one day, and there was a note from Tony basically saying, goodbye, good luck, I'll see you. And they went into some sort of panic, and they were looking for someone to come work with Mike. And they auditioned a bunch of people, and nothing was working out. And they called me because I had a bunch of radio experience in my days in Chicago, and they said, will you come do a couple of days with Mike Golick, whom I had never heard of in my entire life. And I walked in, and I took one look at him, and I was extraordinarily unimpressed. And you know, I was just there to have fun for a couple of days. We did a couple of days. They offered me the job. They said, these guys have a good rapport, good chemistry. So let me see if I got this straight. You got a radio show that's on in 4 markets, has a weekly cumulative audience of about 13,000 people, which is, in our business, nothing. And you're asking me to take myself off SportsCenter. They had just moved me to SportsCenter. You're asking me to take myself off SportsCenter. You got to be out of your mind. This show will be canceled in a year. I'm sitting next to this fat former football player no one ever heard of. You got to be crazy. So that's how we worked out a deal where I continued to do SportsCenter, which I did for 11 years. So that was what I thought when we started. And I would never have guessed that any of this was going to happen. And so that's why when anyone asks me, you know, if people come over and ask to take a picture or anything like that, does it bother me? I say, are you crazy? For the first 5 years we were doing the show, we were the only ones who knew we were doing this show. So it's a delight. I'm thrilled with what's happened to us. I've met the President of the United States. I've been on the David Letterman show. I played tennis with Chris Everett. I get to come back and broadcast with Northwestern, and everyone acts like it's a big deal. It's fabulous. And I would never have imagined that would happen. Never. It just goes to show you. I mean, I can see it's almost the top of the hour. Now, I have nowhere to be, but you guys may. But my overriding piece of advice to you on that front would be answer your phone. Because almost everything I have pursued actively did not work out the way I wanted. And almost every really good thing that has happened to me has happened by accident. Has happened because I answered my phone one day and someone offered me something I wasn't expecting. And it worked out.
Okay, I have 2 questions about Twitter. So at first you describe yourself as authorities on all matters on Twitter. Could you explain why?
That's really a joke. If you go to my Twitter... it's at ESPN Greeny, and you know, you put the little, you know, I'm not very technologically advanced, so one of the guys on my staff had to show me how to set this up. But you put in some description of yourself, and I describe myself as the world's foremost authority on all matters, because I think I am. Which is to say, you can ask almost anyone any question, and my answer will be better.
And then I know that a lot of people, they just watch sports like online, or they just tweet a lot of things. So are you worried that you will lose your audience someday because nobody will watch your show someday?
It's an interesting thought. What that really is a bigger picture question about the influence of technology and how it's changing broadcasting. And it's an excellent thought. And what people ask me all the time, now I know that I am the world's foremost authority on all matters, but the answer to the question, where is all this going, is I don't know. I don't know what technology is going to do to the business. I don't know. The one thing I do know is there will always be a market. There will always be a need for the immediacy that radio brings. Now, what form that radio is transmitted in, meaning whether you're listening to it on an AM or an FM or a satellite or some other means, I don't know. But what I do know is there will always be a need for an immediate a medium that is immediately reactionary to whatever is going, reactive, whatever the word is, to whatever is going on in the world. That I think is not going to go away. And television, as we know it, I think is also not going to go away. But I do think that it has evolved. For example, if you watch SportsCenter now, SportsCenter looks totally different from the way it did 10 years ago. And ESPN is dominated now by shows like Mike and Mike and PTI and First Take and Around the Horn that are based on what? That are based on opinion and analysis. Why? Because everyone already has the information. When I was a student at Northwestern, we would put on ESPN SportsCenter at 11 o'clock at night to find out what happened, because you didn't otherwise know. You didn't have a way of knowing who won the football game. Oh, well, maybe the football game because you'd be in a bar watching it, but you didn't know, or a coffee shop watching it. Excuse me, but you know, you didn't otherwise know what happened that day. That's how you got your news. Now, by the time you put me on, you know who won. So you need something more from me. That's the way technology has impacted what I do now. Now, how it is going to influence the next 5 years or 10 years, I honestly don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I wish I had a better answer than that, but I don't know where it's headed.
Hey, sorry, this isn't about journalism at all. I was just kind of curious.
What's this one about? I haven't approved this question yet. This is the journalism portion. I'll be doing a speech on health and media and science a little bit later in the day.
I was going to ask you what your thoughts are on the role of analytics in sports and where you thought that was going in the future.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So analytics, which is things like sabermetrics and things like that, they are extraordinarily important, and I hate them. Which is to say, to me, fantasy is much this way as well. And I've started playing fantasy sports because my 10-year-old son loves it, and he's obsessed with it. So we have a fantasy football team. We played fantasy basketball. And I do see the fun in it. But to me, sports is something much more than numbers. Like sports, to me, there's a whole gorgeousness and magic and poetry and beauty in all of it, in the blood and the sweat and the tears and the feeling. Sports is a feeling. Sports as a fan is about a feeling that it gives you. And if you allow that to be disseminated into exclusively, someone's OPS or someone's WAR or someone's, QBR, in my opinion, you're really missing the best part of it. Now, the truth is, the people within the sport swear by it. Okay, so there are no more managers in baseball. There will never be any more managers in baseball who manage, quote, by the gut. That was a very frequently used expression back in the day. Guys like Don Zimmer, who I mentioned before, used to say, I don't manage by the book because I never read the book. These days, the book is this thick, and it's got everybody. This guy's average against left-handed pitching on sunny days in West Coast cities on the third day after a road trip, and they've got those numbers, and they're breaking them down, and that is what is dictating every decision that's made in sports, and it's only going more in that direction. So if you're interested in a career in sports, then analytics is an excellent avenue, because every team in every sport is going to employ people like that. You're going to have people whose specialty is that stuff. As a fan, I don't care for it. I'm not interested in someone's WAR. I watch. Is it good or bad? Don't tell me Mike Trout was the American League MVP this year. I'm just not listening to you. Miguel Cabrera was the American League MVP this year. I don't care what Mike Trout's wins above replacement value was. His team could have finished fourth without him. So that's my view as a fan. But it's an excellent question. And the truth is, the role of analytics in sports is only growing and it is an excellent one to pursue if that's something you're interested in a career in sports.
All right, you guys, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. How about a big round of applause?